Right, if you're a physio, I want you to stay with me for the next 10 or 12 minutes or so because there's something happening within our profession that almost nobody is openly speaking about. You studied for years, you genuinely care about the patients that you help, and you worked really hard to get in the position that you're in. But somewhere along the way, a feeling started to arise. Something started to feel a little bit off. Not something blatantly off to the point of you having to leave the profession, but still, it wasn't right enough to just ignore it. So, this video is about that feeling, what's actually causing it, and what some physios are doing about it. Let me tell you what a normal week looks like for a lot of physios. So you're up early in the morning, you're into clinic, let's say your first patient is at 8 o'clock. And then for the next 8 or 9 hours, you're on, like you're fully on back to back patients, no real lunch break, and you're rushing through assessments because you're aware that the next patient is already in the waiting room. So by mid afternoon, you find that your feet are hurting, your low back is tight, and you're conscious that you're falling behind on the notes of previous patients. So there's mental stress in there. But here's the irony about it. And I guess this is something that nobody mentions in university, but 32 to 40% of physios experience low back pain in any given 12-month period, which is a crazy stat. So we're helping people get out of pain while quietly having to manage our own. Then there is the emotional side of things. So every patient walks through the door and they carry something with them, be it their pain, their fears, their frustrations, the setbacks that they've had. And then when we see them, we go all in, we emotionally invest in the situation because we have to be able to connect, to be able to create that therapeutic relationship to get the outcomes that they're looking for. So we care, we listen, we solve their problems to the best of our abilities. But then you go home and you are carrying like some piece of every one of those conversations. And then the weekend comes and you're trying to make a few extra bobs, so you get involved in some teams and do some sport cover, which means you're up early on the weekends, you're out in all weather conditions and fucking pissing down rain and cold. And then it gets to Sunday, and Sunday evening comes along, you start looking at the clock because you're conscious that the weekend's running out, and you know that in the back of your mind, the full Monday that you have ahead of you tomorrow. Um, so important to say that you can genuinely like love helping people and still completely feel drained by the structure of your job. That is not weakness. That is not a you problem. That is just the unfortunate reality of the current in-person physiotherapy model. Okay, so let's be fully honest about it. I have had conversations with literally hundreds of physios over the last 12 months or so. And a common thing that echoes amongst these conversations is that a lot of physios are carrying some form of quiet resentment, not necessarily towards like physiotherapy as a whole or towards, the patients that they're dealing with, but more towards the structure that they're forced to work within. Um, if you're working in clinic or in hospital, you'll start to notice that with older physios, they've come to the point of, just accepting the structure that they work in. They've made their peace with, the long days, the limited ceiling in terms of income, and generally the lack of control and lack of flexibility in the career. And then you catch yourself as a slightly younger physio thinking, is this just what happens? Is this just what being a physio is like? And then you feel guilty for even thinking that way. Like you should just be grateful for being a physio. Like you're educated, you're in a good job, like you make an okay living, you get to help people. Like what more do you want? So you kind of guiltily push that thought down. But inevitably, things can't be pushed down; they come up in other ways. So inevitably, it comes back up. The Sunday dread before the busy week, the sense that no matter how hard you work, the model won't change, the ceiling won't change, like the rate of your progression won't change. And like ultimately, if you're a physio, more than likely you care deeply about your work, but the job is starting to take more from you than it gives back. And I suppose that tension, that's exactly what this video is really about. Okay, let's step back from the emotional side of things for a second and let's look at things a little bit more logically, because this problem, it isn't down to like weakness or fatigue. Like it very much is structural within the profession. So the traditional physio career, like it's almost entirely built on one model, and that's ultimately trading your time for money, and that's it. And the maths of that model don't change no matter how good you get, like no matter how many master's degrees you do or CPD courses you do. Like ultimately, if you're trading time for money, there's an innate ceiling on that. So generally, like early career with the physio, you're earning anywhere from, let's say, 35 to 40K per year. Mid slash late career, maybe you're earning anywhere between 50 and 70K per year. And then the only way to really get beyond that is to be a clinic owner, which sounds like freedom and it sounds like the obvious route to go if you're working in clinic. But most clinic owners will tell you that this just means like more responsibility, more overheads, on top of your already packed clinical schedule. So for a profession that requires 4+ years of education, and like it requires so much emotional and physical energy for you to be able to provide your best for your patients, considering the level of requirements that you need to be a physio, the financial ceiling like can be surprisingly low. And you know what? Like even more than purely finances, it's the lack of leverage that you have with your really valuable physiotherapy skills. Like in most physio careers, the only way to earn more is to ultimately like work more. There's no way to grow without, completely sacrificing your personal time and energy, so there's a core limitation in that model, and that's the ultimate problem. And most of us were never told about this while we were studying, and it's something that we only find out once we are a few years into the profession. At some point, usually around the 5 to 10 year mark, a lot of physios start quietly asking a question. They start asking, like, is this really it for the next 30 years of my career? Like, let that sink in for a second, because that question really, really matters. It's not a baseless complaint, it's not ingratitude, it is a clear eyed look at the career ladder of a physio and realizing that it is shorter than you potentially thought. Um, like with that progression, like it comes slowly. The lifestyle flexibility doesn't really improve. The things that you'd hoped for in your career, like the things that you hoped a career in physio would give you, having lots of time to yourself, having like flexibility and freedom, having financial breathing room. Once you're a few years into your career, they feel way further away than when you started out your career. Um, so that is the point that a lot of physios hit. But unfortunately, most of them don't do anything about that feeling. They just settle back into their routine. They wait for Monday to come around again, the next patient's in the door, and they just keep in the rhythm of doing, 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 and they never look up, to choose their own direction. But some physios do start looking for a different answer. I was one of those physios. I love the work and still do. Like, I genuinely believe in the power of physiotherapists, and I believe that what we do like genuinely makes a real difference in people's lives. But about 5 years ago, I started to feel the squeeze of the traditional in-person physio model. The physical fatigue, the income ceiling, the sense that like no matter how hard I worked, the freedom that I really craved for my career, just wasn't part of the deal of being a physio classically. So I reached a point where I was seriously considering leaving the profession altogether. But instead, I came across the idea of using my physio skills in the online context. And honestly, my initial reaction was, that's surely not going to work. Like, you need to be in person in the room to assess somebody, to treat somebody, to do hands on. That's what I'd been told, and that's all I'd ever been exposed to. So ultimately, that was what I believed. Um, but the more research I did, the more I looked into it and thought about the logistics of it, the more I realized that, I've been thinking about it, in a slightly wrong way, because in my mind and in my, I suppose, philosophy, the bulk of the long-term value that we provide to our patients, it comes from like two sources. It comes from exercise and education. And those two things can be seamlessly packaged and delivered in the online context. Like, and in my mind, they can be delivered more effectively online than they can in person, because online clients have your continued support and accountability between sessions. So it's not like they just do their rehab while they see you in person. They actually have that continued and support and accountability. So they follow through with the rehab programming. So like realizing how effectively we can package and deliver education and exercise online, that really was the turning point for me. So let's zoom out for a second. Physios are slowly beginning to realize something that personal trainers realized like over a decade ago, that your skill set is incredibly valuable and that it doesn't have to be confined to just a clinical setting. The same knowledge that you use every single day in clinic or in hospital, your knowledge around movement and pain and rehab and performance, all of these things can be packaged seamlessly into an online service that you can deliver from your laptop from anywhere, in forms of like online coaching, creating digital rehab programs, um, working in a hybrid model where you keep like some clinic or hospital work going, but also build something alongside of it. That is becoming more and more commonplace in the physio industry, and I absolutely love to see it. So the skill set, like the physio skill set, ultimately has not changed. It's just the delivery model that has. And the difference in what this unlocks in my mind is really significant, because instead of helping like 8 or 10 patients per day, you can work with a cohort of clients with a structured program. You can set your own hours, you can work from your laptop from whatever fucking corner of the world you want. Your income ceiling, like, that disappears. So you can clearly see the massive benefits, not only to you the clinician, but also to your patients, because you're able to provide a kick-ass service where they have lots of support and lots of accountability and lots of structure, so they can actually get the results that they're looking for. Um, so I know that this is all like sounding nice and it's theory. So let's get real with it, and let me give you a concrete example of what this actually looks like in practice. So let's say Cian, he is a physio and clinic owner from Ireland, and he runs Command Physiotherapy. So when he came to me initially, he had the same problem that a lot of physios do. Yes, he had an online presence, but he just couldn't convert any of his followers into actual paying clients. Like, Ian's a kick-ass physio. There was no shortage of knowledge or like motivation or drive there. He just simply didn't have the systems in place, or didn't know how to get things off the ground online. No content strategy, no sales process, no structured way to deliver his online physio service. So over the course of us working together, we built that out for him, the backend systems to actually run an online service, a content strategy that attracts the right people, a sales process that doesn't feel salesy or like selling. Like, we are healthcare professionals, we're not salespeople. So any sales that we teach the people that work with us, like, it's the same approach that I use in my sales, like very non-salesy, very low pressure kind of sales. That just personally aligns with the type of values that I have. So I find it works well. So he left the mentorship with paying clients and like a clear roadmap for him to scale his own business over the next 24 months. Not instead of his clinical work, but alongside of his clinical work. And I think that that's an important point. So that's a concrete example of what that shift can actually look like in practice. So a physio who already had like a full clinical caseload, building something alongside his clinical work that can give him more options, can give him more income, and can give him a path that isn't just strictly dependent on the amount of hours that he works per day or the amount of patients that he can physically see per day. Let me be straight with you about the income side of things, because I do think that it's important. So in the traditional physio model, your income is directly tied to your time. So if you stop working, you stop earning, and that's the deal. That's what you sign up for. But online, that does change. So you're building systems, creating content, creating programs that can serve your clients without you actually being physically present, like every hour, every day. Um, so personally, I've been working fully online for 5 years now. I work roughly 20 hours per week, while earning more than I ever would in a physio clinic setting. I can work from my laptop, meaning I can travel when and where I want. My personal training is something that I'm really, really passionate about, and I like my training to be my fulcrum of the day, like the main thing that I plan my day around, which is a massive privilege. So I can train when I want in the day and then choose when I want to work based around when it suits me. Um, that's not me being like, oh, look at me, I have it all figured out. It all like this isn't me trying to sell you anything. This is simply a real example of what the online model looks like when it's executed correctly. Your income is not limited by how many hours you work or how many clients that you see. And that's just a new level of freedom that the in-person side of physio things just can't help you access. Let me be as honest as I possibly can with you. So while building something online has provided me with a lifestyle that I could never access while working in person, like in the same breath, building something online, it's not easy. It requires you learning new skills, it requires patience, it requires you being willing to put yourself outside of your comfort zone. There's a period at the start of you building something online where you're putting in lots of front end work and you don't have much to show for it. Your follower numbers aren't flying up, you're not getting tons of cash in the bank. And it is difficult. It's a period of chewing glass, let's say, where you just have to do the thing. You're not getting lots of external validation, but you just got to keep taking action and keep working forward. When I started out, I really had no idea what I was doing. I figured it out through a combination of trial and error, and also, just spending literally thousands of hours trying to figure things out and spending thousands of euro on mentorship, learning from people who'd built businesses in different contexts and taking whatever bits I could. Um, but here's the difference. So the efforts that you put in online to build something, like they compound. So when you build something like a piece of content or a resource or a program, like all of those things compound over time. They build on themselves basically. Whereas in person, the effort that you put in a clinic or hospital setting, it doesn't compound in the same way. Monday looks like Monday looks like Monday. Like every week you're starting from zero. And that is the fundamental difference between the two models, something that can compound and grow over time, or something that just remains the same and resets every week. So, if you're a physio and any of this has resonated, just know that you are not ungrateful. You are not the reason that you're burnt out. You're not weak for wanting a change and wanting to try something different. You're simply recognizing the structural limits of a model that you were never taught to question. And once you see those limits, it's very hard to unsee them. Naturally, if you're of a growth mindset, you'll start looking for better way to apply your skills than you've already been doing. There are hundreds of physios who've already made the shift online because they found themselves in the exact same mental position that you're in. Just know that the path to get out of that in-person work, it does exist. It just hasn't been personally mapped out for you. If you're a physio who resonated with this and you want to understand how physios are building online businesses with the skills that they already have, I've put together a free training that walks you through the whole process step by step. You'll find the link for that in the description below. But other than that, I will see you guys in the next one.